John Kemper here with Chris Peterson. I got a bone to pick with you already. No, I'm just kidding. I don't have any.
No, already.
Yeah, no, I saved that for like 30 minutes in. No. Um, man, how have you been in this quarantine?
Pretty good. It's been rough without sports a little bit. It's been, kind of boring, I guess, in that regard, because that's just kind of, a way that I kind of pass time, and kind of keep track of things. And so it's been interesting, but I've been, trying to, keep with my day job at the IR and been doing some homeschooling with my son. So I've been doing some work and teacher as everybody else kind of has. So, yeah, just trying to hang in there and trying to watch the news a little bit less, to be honest.
Yeah, same here. That 24-hour news cycle, man. I
Yeah.
watch it for about a half hour. I think you're good. So
Yeah, I really had to cut myself off. I just got too, I got too much anxiety and too, just like I got really depressed for a good week,
yeah,
I think it was just from watching it all the time, and seeing how many people are getting sick. I actually started searching out the post where it was like saying how many people were recovered, just to get the positive in
yeah,
my mind that, yeah, a lot of people are getting sick, but people are still recovering too.
yeah. No, that's really important. I think that's really important. So
Yeah.
I should have said this at the beginning, but Chris Peterson, sports editor at the Helena Independent Record. So I like to announce you 5 minutes in
Yeah.
instead.
Hey, that's all right.
But um, what is it? What has it been like at the paper, especially in the sports side, trying to come up with content and trying to get stories out?
Yeah, it's been a little bit different. It's been a bit of a challenge. It's not, I'm used to. I come from the newspaper world, but I also I do sports blogging and stuff. I run like a sports blog, like a Michigan sports blog, and so I'm kind of used to having to figure out content for like the off season, and because really you're in that area you're focusing on football and basketball mostly, and then after that it's so I'm kind of used to having an idea of trying to figure out that content, but it is difficult and it's tough not to have spring sports. For one, I just miss being outside and having that aspect of it. But yeah, it really is different not having live sports. I mean, our as people have probably noticed, we don't quite have as much in the sports section right now, trying to do a little bit more of our news coverage. And some of us are hopping over and doing some different stuff. We have Ryan, one of my reporters, has been doing some news stuff, and I have a little community feature coming out in the morning that people can check out. So just kind of trying to do some different things. But the funny thing about sports is no matter what, people have that interest. And so there's always, different ways to find stories, but it has been a bit of a challenge. I won't lie.
Yeah, I was talking with Anthony, our friend up in Kalispell. Well, friend, hey, friend,
Frenemy.
frenemy, enemy, nemesis. I don't know. No, not really. But and we were talking about that
Just
because
saying that because he's a Bucks fan, really.
yeah, gosh, yeah. Let's rabbit hole really fast. Isn't it nice to root for a team that doesn't have to change their uniform every couple of years to stay relevant?
Oh, yeah, I love it. Yeah, this,
Yeah.
the classic is the best, man. We don't have to rename the stadium or get new uniforms or you
Yep.
know. I love the social distancing posts I've been seeing about the Vikings, though. That's kept me cheerful during this downtime.
Anything making fun of the Vikings or Bears, Eric Peterson is always a good
Yeah,
one. So,
exactly.
yeah. So Anthony and I, we were talking about posts you see on Twitter from just a variety of sports reporters, just all over. So not focusing on one spot or the other, but just really struggling to find talent or to find stories um, and not complaining a whole lot about it, but just you can tell they're struggling. So, uh, man, if this isn't a time for sports reporters to really show how creative they can get and make themselves even more marketable in the future, I don't know what of another time that would be.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And I think, one thing that doing like the blogging stuff has kind of taught me, because in that, there's a million Michigan, sites out there, whatever. So you kind of have to find ways to think differently and to make your content stand out a little bit. And so I think this is a great time for, what's called evergreen content. I don't know if you're
Yep.
familiar with that, but the top 10 list, the class, this would be a great time to look at, the best Helena football teams of all time, Helena High and Helena Capital. So those are kind of some things I'm thinking about, doing. And those are projects I wanted to do anyways. They just were kind of more summer, that had more summer in mind, and might have to move some of those up. Looking back at some of the best games from this past year is something I thought about doing too. But I'm reluctant to do that quite yet because I'm still holding out like the tiniest bit of hope that we'll still have a few more games this year.
Yeah, yeah, and let's segue into that. MHSA came out today, said obviously things off till the 24th. They're following, it looks like, Governor Bullock's lead on that. But then they did do something they haven't done, and they gave basically a drop dead date of May 4th. If students aren't in class in person, they're going to have to cancel the season. What are your thoughts on that?
I guess I was a little surprised that they did that. I thought they would just either, extend it to the 24th or just, suspend or cancel it. I guess I thought they might go one of those two ways, but I don't, I think the MHSA is being smart about it. I think that they're trying to, at this point, I mean, information changes so much. I don't really understand the point of, like, we don't need to cancel it right now. I mean, I can see it from both ways. I really don't think there's much of a chance that the MHSA is going to be able to pull this off. There's just so many things that you're going to have to do. You're going to have to make sure that, all your athletes are, basically going to be able to, either be able to test them or, they're going to have some type of policy. But that's going to be the same for the schools as well. So, I mean,
Yep.
It's hard to see people going back to the schools by, May 4th or whatever, but I'm certainly not a medical expert. I have no idea. And I know things with the social distancing have been trending in a better direction. So, and there's just a lot we don't know. We don't know once you get it, once you fight it off, if you become immune to it or if you can get it again later. There's so many different X factors. But I do think the MHSA deserves some credit for at least trying to, play it out as long as possible and trying to do what's best for the athletes. Because I think we can all agree that if there's any way to have a spring sports season, I mean, we should definitely try and do that for, these kids that have worked hard for it.
Yeah, I agree. That's been the frustrating thing on my end is seeing people post or just post or talk about just cancel it, just be done with it, forget it. Follow Idaho's lead or Washington's lead or even Wyoming, and it's easy to say, especially when you don't have kids, especially when you don't have seniors that are getting ready to finish off their high school career, not only in sports but just in life in general. And the fact that there's a chance they don't get to experience anything like you and I got to experience of,
Right.
prom and a senior skip day and the whole graduation experience. And just that feeling when you walk out of that school for the last time as a student, just that feeling. So I really appreciate how the MHSA is handling it and taking it in steps. And that even goes to Governor Bullock as well, where, a lot of governors are really jumping ahead, and I'm not faulting them at all for that. But, he seems to be more measured and taking a more conservative approach and, giving it a couple weeks and giving it a couple more weeks and to see, if we can have just regular life back, sooner. And then, of course, in the sports side.
Yeah, and it's it's such a hard situation because none of us have ever experienced anything like this before, at least that I can think of. So it's really uncharted territory for everybody right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So one kind of cool thing that came down today is a lot of people went crazy for it, but getting Helena Capital on ESPN had Jeremy Schnell with the TV really pushing for that. I think there were some other people as well. But how cool was that for them?
That's really amazing. Yeah, I have to say when I first saw Jeremy kind of doing that, I didn't think there would be much chance. I know one of the parents, yeah, Don Cresswell is one of them that had really pushed to get it on there. So I think it's really awesome. Montana, it really has an underrated sports scene. It doesn't get much national attention, and so I mean for the community of Helena, what an awesome thing for those four seniors and talking about things that you miss out. This team didn't get to do the fire truck parade. They really haven't even got to take a picture with their trophy yet.
Yeah.
I mean, all those the no pep assembly, none of that stuff. And so I mean, if you talk about all kind of getting robbed of that experience, I mean, they never got to have any of that stuff. So I think this is a cool way that they get to stand out in a different way, and then that's something that's going to be really memorable for them.
Yeah, those are great points. Those are things that as the sound of the crowd fades, those are things you forget about, the ride on the fire truck and all of that they couldn't even do if they wanted to right now, just
Right.
because of
Yeah.
all the social distancing. But yeah, it was rough. I was in Chicago when the state tournament was going on, so I was following you and others really close. And boy, I mean, I was really kind of shocked when they did just call it on that Friday night, and I get why they did. Um, but what was it like being there to experience that whole thing, and how did you find out that they were going to cancel it?
Yeah, it was weird. The whole tournament was just, it was eerie. It had an eerie feeling because I remember that day, with that morning was when, the NCAA, all the conference tournaments and March Madness got canceled that morning. And so it was kind of like on Thursday, you just kind of had this feeling of foreboding, like it was like at any minute it was going to come down and stop. And then Thursday night was when Governor Bullock declared the state of emergency in Montana, and so that was like, I think it was like 6 or 7 in the evening. So we were, so I was finding, Brian Michelotti from the MHSA, and being like, hey, what's happening here? And they still ended up playing. And so then by the time it got to Friday, I thought like it seemed like we were going to make it through. And that's kind of the feeling that I had, even talking with some of the coaches, like, Katie Garson Forbar or Charlie West of Billings West, or Charlie Johnson of Billings West, um, after, but it was like, it was like the day before we thought it wasn't going to happen. And then it seemed like it was. And so, yeah, it was a little, I guess I wasn't shocked. I mean, I kind of always thought when there was presumptive cases that might be when they say, okay, we have to at this point. But I was a little surprised that maybe they didn't try to do, something maybe without fans, or just have championship games without fans. I think maybe their idea of it would, is if you're not going to have the fans, maybe just not even go there. I'm not exactly sure what the thought process was. I know they looked at a bunch of different options. But basically, I found out, just kind of, in real time, I was trying to track down Brian, and then we had some other 406 reporters in Butte that were trying to get to Mark Beckman, and he was in an office meeting with somebody, and our reporter was literally camped outside the room trying to figure out what was going on. And so we had heard that it was going to get canceled, and then we just had kind of confirmed it. And then I actually walked over to the scorers table to get a stat sheet. They didn't have a stat sheet, and I was picking it up for my colleague, and Brian must have thought I was coming to ask me about that, and he was like, yeah, it's canceled now. And he told me, and then my heart just kind of sank, a little bit. And I wasn't, like I said, it's like I wasn't surprised, but I was surprised. And I guess just
Exactly.
immediately I just felt for all the kids.
Yeah, and then the video of Hellgate literally finding out after the game to
Mm.
and then they took matters into their own hands and cut down the nets and stuff, which some people got mad at. I mean, what can you do? Got to cut them down, I think. So
it was pretty cool. It was funny because I had the video, and you could hear the MSU official being like, "You can't do that," or like you can hear him, and one of the parents is just like, "If you want to fine him, you can send me the bill. Like, I'll pay for it.
yeah,
Just let them have it." And that was the hard thing too, because we didn't know if they had found out at all. And as from a coaching perspective, that would be, I guess you would want to know if possible, because like in the Hellgate situation, they might have had seniors like that they wanted to, you could have put in the last minute of the game or something
yeah,
if you'd known ahead of time.
yeah,
So it was really weird because, everybody, we all at press row knew it was over. And I think a lot of the fans knew that it was going to get canceled because it was starting to come out on Twitter. So it's like you had a bunch of people that knew it was going to get canceled watching a game of people that didn't know. So that's what kind of made it just a weird kind of situation.
yeah. Um, man, think about Hellgate for a minute. I mean, this is a team that for 4 years and really beyond even that, they were considered the best team in the state.
Yeah.
Year in and year out, they would dominate the regular season. They'd get to the postseason, and something would happen. And then last year, literally, a miracle play by
Yeah.
Bozeman, snatches that game. And then this was the year. And Hellgate, man, you could tell all year they were on a mission to win. I have no doubt in my mind they would have won the state tournament, going away in that. And then literally, I don't know if it's their luck or what, that gets pulled from them and they get to be co-champions and just talk about 4 years of not necessarily bad luck, but just, man, how close. And then you're at the pinnacle of like, finally, we're going to be called state champs, and it gets pulled out from underneath you.
I honestly, I can't even imagine, how that feels. I think you can see that, like if you watch, Raleigh Wooster, when they say he just kind of crumbles in half, because that's like the one thing that he hadn't achieved, in his high
Yep.
school career, along with a lot of his teammates. But, when you look at a great player like him, and I mean, he's going to have that title of being a state champion. So it's not like, anybody can say about Abe Johnson or Wooster, or those guys, that they aren't state champions, but it's still different when you have that question, because while everybody knows that, Hellgate would have beat Billings Skyview can still say, well, we
Exactly
don't know
right.
that,
Yeah.
I mean, because we don't know that,
Yeah.
we all thought that, Georgetown was going to beat Villanova back in the day, and it didn't happen either. So,
Yep.
so upsets can happen. And I think that's probably the killer part about Hellgate, because they did everything that they could. They played every game, they dominated every opponent. They won by 27. Their average margin of victory was 27 points, which is
Yeah.
pretty ridiculous if you think
Yeah.
about it. So yeah, I don't know how to honestly even comprehend that thought of putting all the time and effort and really being the best at something and not having the chance to kind of put that on. I think that's the hard thing, like with Helena Capital and all these teams, is like Hardin is another great example. They lost in the championship game, 2 years in a row. Both of their teams, actually, their girls and boys teams, and they both got co-championships this year, which was kind of cool. But it's still not the same, like for famous left hand. I
Yeah.
mean, like that would have been his crowning achievement. I mean, that for for those people in that school, and just to not really have that just makes it bittersweet, I guess. I just can't think of a better word to describe it.
Yeah. Well, I think of that way with Helena Capital too, because it's the same questions. The matchup against West, man, you talk about a great matchup between those
Yeah.
two. They won early. Capital beat them earlier in the year for sure.
Yeah.
West losing the state tournament championship last year to Helena High, and being able to get back there and have that experience going into that game would have helped them some. But again, you just can't. It's rough. I mean, Helena Capital is a state champ, and West is going to be able to say that too. And there's not this definitive ending
Yeah.
with it. So it's a rough deal all the way around. And the good thing for Helena Capital, other than the seniors they lose, which that's just a whole nother level of pain. They do bring back a lot of players next year, and definitely are in that upper echelon to compete again for a state championship.
Well, yeah, and that's you bring up like the Albrecht twins. They were there in the championship game last year, and they don't. I mean, they do get to call themselves champions, but like I talked to them after the game too, and it's like they just have this kind of it's like cool, like it's
Yeah.
I don't. It's just it's cool. It's better than not getting it, and it was a smart move, I guess, by the MHSA of trying to make the best of a bad situation. It was better than nobody getting crowned state champion.
Yeah.
But yeah, and fans, I mean, we got robbed of a great matchup that night. That one, I think I do think Capital would have won. That would have been my prediction, but it would have been a tight game throughout for sure. And that's
Yeah.
like, the shared championship just makes me think of college football, and I grew up in that era, so I'm kind of like,
Yep.
well, I'm used to it, but that's when it'd be a much more narrow vote, Capital or Billings West, than Hellgate and Billings Sky.
Exactly. Yeah. I think Capital finds a way to win that game myself too. They seem to do what they needed to do at the right times to get the wins for sure. So, so you've been at the Helena IR now almost a year. I mean, a little shy, but man, what's your taking in this first 10 months or so? What's Helena been like to you? How have you liked it so far?
I love Helena, actually. It's kind of a great. It's like it's not a big city, but it has like a bigger feel than Havre, where I'm from. But it still has a small town feel to it. Like Helena, just I guess in all of Montana kind of feels that way. I mean, there's definitely different parts of Montana, and they all have their different, I guess, feelings and just different, personalities. Missoula's different than Butte, and Butte's different than Helena, but there's kind of a shared, I don't know, there's just Montana people are just really nice, and I found that here in Helena too. And it's a great sports scene. And yeah, my first soon to be hopefully year coming in August it's been really great. So hopefully I'll get to have a lot more.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think you've done a fantastic job. I mean, I know I've told you that over and over, so I'm not trying to, brown nose you or anything, but it's just been very refreshing to have you here. So one thing you and I talked about, I think it was at divisionals. We were talking about doing a podcast, you coming on the Bengal Beat, and talking about stories and how you pick stories in a town that is very divided when it comes to Helena
Yeah.
and Capital. And I don't think you'll ever make one side happy. You know what I mean? It's very difficult to be able to balance that. So as a sports editor, how did you find balancing that this first year between, Helena High and Capital High?
Yeah, it's a delicate balance that you want to strike, because you don't want to favor one side or the other, in any way. And so I try not to do that, although it at sometimes in one sport or another might look like I'm doing that. Like with basketball, it was more kind of Capital. Not that I was ignoring Helena High, but some of the feature stories were more, Capital oriented. Wrestling was kind of that way too, but like cross country was, Helena more, focused in that one. So I think for me, I try to do, the core coverage, the game, getting to the games and, having those results and making sure everybody knows what's going on. I try to make sure that stuff is as even as possible. I try to get to, different Helena High games and different Capital games as much as I can. I don't, sit there and keep a chart like, oh, I've been to Capital this many times or this many times. I just try to mix it up, and I try to, I try to look at what are going to be some of the funner matchups, on a certain weekend. It might be where Helena High has, a couple of more interesting matchups than Capital. So I might check out a couple of those games, so I try to mix it up and give both sides as much of, that coverage as I can. And then I just try to find, those stories that, that I think are interesting, or that, have kind of that broad appeal to other people. And so it's sometimes those, they don't always come up, equally, I guess, I could say. I try to, find them out. And as I get to know people better and have more of a relationship with the community here, that's going to make it a little bit easier, I think. But that's kind of the main way. I try to keep the coverage as equal as I can. And then I try to find those really great stories, and I just try to tell them as best as I can.
I completely agree. And I know I've ran into people on both sides that will count paragraphs. And I mean, they want, if Capital gets 10, Helena wants 10, and that sort of a deal. So, I mean, it's a tough deal. I didn't go to either school. So, I cover Helena High. I don't like the homer I don't like being called a homer. I don't like people saying I'm a homer. I really don't feel like I am. Definitely, if you listen to a broadcast, I'm obviously going to be slanted a little more towards Helena High in most of them. But it's a tough deal for me to handle, for sure. I don't know where I was going with any of that, but I just wanted to talk about myself, I guess, for a second. So, no.
Well, yeah, no, and that's the thing with, I definitely don't have any skin, in the game, except for, I'm just rooting for interesting stories,
Yeah.
Like it doesn't really matter to me who wins out of, Capital or Helena High, that, and really at the, like the state level either, other than, you start to get, as you start to get to know the kids and the coaches and stuff. And so you want to see them do well, and that helps you do well in your business too. I mean, so there's kind of multiple factors there, but I think one thing, hopefully, the longer I'm here, I'll be able to build up more of a trust factor with both of those communities, and East Helena too. They're another one that's going to be coming up here soon too. So it's going to be a three-way kind of, balancing the act in a few years. But I think, once people tend to see that, and hopefully they'll see there isn't, any bias one way or another in our coverage.
Yeah, and it takes people to understanding the situation. So if you look at basketball this year, you probably were a little heavier on Capital. than on Helena High. But you also had two teams at Capital who were insanely good. The girls and the boys. Not only were the boys good, they were a lot of fun to watch. And on the flip side, Helena High on both sides, this was a year they both struggled. So you kind of gotta kind of go towards the teams that are playing better, and maybe having a little viewership or readership too on that. But yeah, I agree. I think as you build more of your reputation and get to know people in the community, I think that's when people will start bringing stories to you and mentioning, hey, have you
Yeah.
thought about this? And that's probably where some of the best stories can come from.
Oh yeah, and then a lot of times too, just when you're like talking to kids or parents or whatever, coaches, and they'll say, "Oh, did you know this or that?" And it's just kind of off the cuff type of things that you never really would know before. And it's just kind of getting into those open-ended, dialogues. Like when I try to interview people, I really try to just kind of get them talking, and then
Yeah.
that's kind of when you get the best information. And yeah, and that's another thing too. Like, I'm still learning how to be, a sports editor. I mean, at least this whole year has been a learning process for me. Is I've always was just kind of the sports reporter before, so having to do the writing and planning the coverage and designing the pages and all that there's things I learned along the way that I knew in basketball season that I didn't know during football season or what. So I'm hoping that once people get to see that more, and once I get better at my job too, then it'll kind of balance itself out that way.
Yeah, well, I think you're doing a good job. I mean, I haven't heard anybody have any complaints when I'm around talking to people. I know people complain about everything, but I've heard pretty much nothing but good things from your coverage.
Well, it's all about perspective too. Like we'll have it's interesting because we'll have a bunch of stories on Capital, and then my photographer will say, "Oh, this person told me how we never use Capital photos in the paper." So it's everybody's perspective.
That's exactly it. And when they look, I mean, if they're not
Yep.
reading the paper every day, maybe they don't see it, and maybe that's the day they pick it up, and you have a story on, Bengal Bill,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
something
But
like that. Yeah.
it is really different though, because like in Havre, I covered other schools than Havre, but none of those schools were competitors with Havre. They were all Class B or Class C. So it's interesting. Like when Capital went and they won at the Helena High gym, I was trying to think of a headline, and I had this good idea in my head, like Queens of the Jungle or whatever. That's what I ended up going with, which probably wasn't. Some Helena High people probably didn't like that as much, but
Yeah.
And so I do have to think about that, but I'm at the same time, I'm like, that's what happened on the floor. And it's,
Yeah.
so it's, but so I do weigh those. I mean, those things do cross my mind, but I try to find that. I try to say, well, if I wasn't worried about what the fans were going to say, pretty much, what would I do? And so I feel like, if I feel good about it on an ethical, basis, and I know I'm not really slanting it one way or another, then I feel okay about it. And,
Yeah.
if people, the other thing too, is I try to, if people have questions or if they call me, I mean, I try to do my best to get, in touch with people and, if
Yeah.
they have questions. And so.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the other part of that too is, you might think of a headline or even a sentence in a story, and it doesn't come off as, it just comes off as a sentence or a nice headline, and then all of a sudden people blow it out of proportion. I know
Right.
that's
Yeah.
happened to me, where I had a parent from Glacier High School flip out on me and tried to get me fired. I think my second or third year doing radio, uh, over a comment about kids being on a bus. I mean, and
Yeah.
not knowing context, I never knew there were certain things that happened at Glacier High School way back when, and so
Right.
making that comment, that linked it to that story for her and really made her mad. I had no idea.
Right.
I mean, in complete honesty, I am probably the most like clueless person when I'm at games, on knowing who people are. A lot of times,
Yeah.
people will say names, and I'm just like, oh yeah, okay, and then, a year or two later, I'll put it together. Sometimes, I mean,
Yeah.
that was the case with Tim McMahon, the AD for Helena High. I'd never met him. I just heard his name a lot, And I was at divisionals, I mean, literally last year, and I'm sitting in the
That's funny.
bleachers watching a game, and someone walks up and goes, "Hey, Tim, da 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 da," and he starts talking. I'm like, "Oh, that's Tim McMahon." Like, I
That's
had
him.
no idea. I mean, yeah. So it's just, I think
I
it's a
found out who
blessing
Tim
and a curse.
McMahon. Yeah, it is kind of. Yeah, I found out who Tim McMahon was because noticed him at all the same. We started noticing each other at all the same events.
Yes, exactly.
And
And I
so,
see him at the events, and I did not put it together. I mean, I'm going to get killed for this if Scott Evans is listening. I talked to Scott Evans for like 2 years before I knew he was Scott Evans. Like,
yeah.
I just was like, he just chit chat and I was like, "Hey, how's it going?" And, no big deal. And then somebody at one point I was walking up and they said, "How's Scott doing?" And I said, "Who?" And they said, "You were just talking to Scott Evans." And I was like, "Oh yeah, he's doing good." And in my head, I'm
Oh
like,
yeah.
"That's Scott Evans." Okay. It's just,
Only the defensive coordinator of the
yeah,
team.
defensive coordinator and yeah, big time, and now the coach. I don't think I've ever told him that. So if he finds out, I'm sure he'll
That's
he'll have
funny.
something to say about it.
I love
But,
Coach. I love Coach Evans.
oh, yeah, yeah,
He's so fun. The second week I went there, or this was the second week of games, I think, after like the first game. It's after the first game I covered, and I walk up there wearing my Michigan pullover, and he's like, and he had me scared for a second, not scared but worried, and he yells at me, "Oh, we're gonna have a problem, Chris," or Peterson or something like that, And I thought he was mad about something I wrote about the game, and he's like, "Oh,
yeah,
I'm a Notre Dame fan," but he had me sold there for a second, so.
yeah.
I
So
kept
what?
that in the back of my mind to never make Scott mad, though.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, he's intimidating. He scares me. I mean, that's how I got a Helena high hat because I wear this hat. Well,
Yeah.
most of the time I'd wear this hat to games, and man, he'd just give it to me. He's a Cubs fan, and
Oh, okay.
I think he came to a game, or I went to interview him, and he said, take that stupid hat off, and he threw me a Helena high hat, and I had to wear that at every game. If I wore this, I don't know
Yeah.
what would happen. So but yeah, no, he's a good dude, for sure. How is it for you to navigate all the different personalities that you run into with coaches? I mean, you go like, for me, I know the coaches other than, obviously whoever is going to be the new Helena High Lady Bengals coach, but I know Day. I've spent a lot of time with Coach Day and with Scott Evans, but when it flips over to Capital, like I will talk to Coach Almquist or Coach Garson Forba, but it's a different sort of dynamic. And I mean, honestly, the first time I saw Coach Almquist coach a game, I was terrified of Coach Almquist. I was just like that. Oh
He
my God.
looks scary.
Yeah, he's very scary, but I mean, the kids just love him, so
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
such a nice balance. And yeah, and I definitely talked to Coach Almquist now, but I mean, how do you deal with those personas? How do you kind of make your way through those?
I try to, every time I, kind of meet with a new coach, I try to really feel them out. And one thing I always try to do is be really respectful of their time. I don't, whether it's practice time, whenever I meet a new coach, I'll, introduce them. And if I'm going to try to go like set up an interview or something, I'll say, when's a good time for me to come, at practice, and I've coached middle school sports. So I know a little bit about what it's like to have a practice schedule, and you only have a very limited amount of time. So to me, always the easiest way to make make an enemy is to try to come in and say, "Hey, I need to talk to you right now, or I need to do
Yes.
this right now."
Yeah.
And so I really try to do that. When I'm trying to do features or whatever, I always try to say, "Hey, when can I work around your schedule?" And so I think that helps a lot. I think coaches respect that, and I think that makes me feel like less of, I don't know, hopefully I feel like less of a burden to them in that way. But
Yep.
it's, to me, I think coaches love talking sports, though. They just, they like their sport, and I like talking sports. So, at the end of the day, I mean, I like to talk X's and O's. So, I'll ask Almquist about, his different, his ideas about different things. And I just kind of get talking to him about, basketball and
Yeah.
different stuff like that. And so that's how I try to manage it. Now, I'm not, not every coach in this area is probably my biggest fan all the time. I have some that, but
Yeah.
and then that's just sometimes how it works. And you have to build that trust, and you have to know that, like if they tell you something off the record, you have to keep it off the record, kind of thing, and building up those relationships. And, that stuff is really important, because if you burn those bridges, with some coaches, all it takes is one time, and they're not ever going to really open up to you in the same way. So I think just however I can build that trust with them, because really my goal, like with every team, is I want to just be a fly on the wall. I want to have, where they're not looking at me twice if, I walk into the locker room and they're doing their post game speech. They're just, oh, that's just Chris.
Yeah.
I just kind of want to blend in, and I just want to be a background figure and not somebody that they're like, oh, I have to, he's going to inconvenience me, because that's how you get yourself out of the loop, basically.
Yeah. Do you actually go into locker rooms?
Not a ton, not a whole
Okay.
lot, but
That's more than me. I won't go. There's like certain areas I find very sacred. That's how I feel about it. And like the locker room's one. I never go in locker rooms. My job is different than your job though. Like,
right.
I think some people, my job isn't to break news. It's not even to bring news. My job is to do play-by-play and try to get you to know the team better and know the coach better.
Right.
So, if a coach tells me, hey, I'm leaving or whatever, like that's never going to be said by me. Like, I'm not going to break
Right.
that
Yeah.
at all. And it was funny when Coach Peterson did resign. Like, I got a couple texts asking questions, like if I knew, and I'm like, dude, I don't like, they don't talk to me that way. I don't ask for that information at all. So it's just two different things. Like, that's more your job than my job.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, there is some, I don't go into locker rooms much, but like, in Haver, I would, like, well, with the boys team, obviously the girls, I wouldn't go in the girls locker room,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
you know what, I would just, usually go in there and do my interview, grab the kids really quick and do interviews or whatever, and so just, I had one coach who he coached at North Star and then became the Haver head coach, and he let me go in the locker room when they made it to like divisionals. And so I took a video of his post game speech or whatever. And so, I mean, I haven't a whole lot, but just kind of having that relationship with the team where you can, walk into the coach's office and say, hey, and they're not gonna, you know what I mean? And so that's kind of what I'm hoping to build, because that is how you get the best stories, when people really, and we are trying to report news and stuff, but at the same time, there's not a ton of really breaking stories in high school sports outside of like what we saw with Eric Peterson the other day.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Everybody, Twitter's funny. So
yeah. That surprised you, I guess, to turn the tables? Did that surprise you? Because you've been here longer than me.
No, it didn't surprise me. Actually, nobody's asked me. So, I was standing next to Coach Peterson at the beginning of the season, and we briefly talked about it. He didn't say anything about leaving. He just, he definitely got the point across that in the next couple of years with his son coming up, that it would be done. So I wasn't surprised that he resigned. In fact, I think when I really thought about it was at divisionals. You were interviewing him down a tunnel or in a hallway, and I was just kind of standing back waiting to talk to him. And he actually broke some and had to stop talking because he was, so emotional. And I've seen him emotional before, but he seemed more emotional that time. And I don't know if it had anything to do with that at all. But that made me think, like, I wonder if this is it. But again, I'm not going to ask him that question and all that. So I thought it would be next year, but I wasn't surprised. So
yeah, that's happened with me before. Like when Scott Filius retired in Haver, he was a great wrestling coach, and I didn't, I had talked to him before then, and I thought he was going to go the next year, and so I kind of caught me by surprise. And great coaches seem to only, sometimes they only last for so long, and he is the kind of guy that I believe him. I believe, and who wouldn't want to watch their son play basketball, and that is him. You only get so much time to do that. He can coach again if he wants to. Eric Peterson, the coaching job he wants in high school basketball.
I just interviewed him this morning for the podcast, and we talked about that. So, well, hey, I don't mean to cut this off, but they give a 40-minute limit on free Zoom, and I don't want to pay for it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but would you want to do this again?
Yeah, for sure. Anytime.
Okay, awesome. Well, we'll get back together and we'll do this. So thanks for coming on, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime, man. I love it. Like I said, it helps me get myself out there a little bit more. So I want people to get to know me.
You got to show off that beard.
I know. The beard.
Awesome. We'll catch you soon.
Yeah. All right. Take care.
You too.